So you're looking to start to learn a brand new foreign language. Now there are some ways that I want to show you how you can actually save a lot of your time and energy so they don't make a lot of mistakes and waste a lot of your time. Time is your most valuable asset, and so you want to be able to get the most results out of the least time possible. So if you've started to learn a language and that language has a different writing system, what most people do first is they start to tackle the alphabet. So it doesn't matter if it's Japanese, Korean, Chinese, Thai, or Hindi, or Arabic. These writing systems can actually produce a lot more obstacles to your learning and effectiveness than necessary. So if you grew up learning a language like Spanish or French or German in school, most of your teachers taught you that alphabet and had you read words and remember vocabulary by looking at the words. Now, I want you to start focusing on changing your mindset into one of, I'm going to focus on reaching the best results possible in the least amount of time. And in order to do that, we need to kind of knock down all of those obstacles in your way. And so one of those biggest obstacles is a different writing system. Now, some languages have different writing systems for a very good reason. They're more equipped to represent the sounds of that language. But if we take a look at the meta level behind that, what we want to focus on is what are the sounds of that language? Let's look at the meta factor of learning that language. For example, I can just take a really easy example from, like, if you're learning Spanish, then you'll probably learn the digraph CH is pronounced ch, and it's exactly the same as in English. But if you're learning French, it's pronounced sh. If you're learning German, it's pronounced sh or ch. And if you're learning Japanese, the romanization is actually ch, and it's a little bit different pronunciation. And if you're learning Chinese, it's pronounced ch. So what happens when you're faced with all of these different writing systems is that what you think is a CH is not always a CH. It's not always exactly what it is in English. And since there are so many differences between these languages and their spelling systems, it's probably best to start off with what are the sounds of the language, and then moving on to how things are actually spelled in that language, in their own alphabet. And so I would say come back to that later once you've mastered what the actual base set of sounds are. So the first thing you want to look at with learning the sounds of another language is you're going to have the stop sounds, which are PTK or P, T, K. Are these aspirated in that language, like P, T, K? Or maybe they're pre-aspirated, like in Icelandic, P, T, K. Now in Icelandic, that's only if the letter is doubled. So these are some small tips that you need to know when you start learning the language. So if you come across a double T in Icelandic, then you know it's a ht sound. But you don't even have to really learn that the double T is that. You just need to learn that there is some sounds that sound like ht. So both Icelandic and Mongolian share these traits. But then in some languages of East Asia, then you need to learn the alveolar palatal sounds like the j and ch, which also exist in some of the Slavic languages. And so by focusing on the sounds, then you can come back to the writing system later to match those up with the sounds that you've learned. Okay, the second thing is a lot of people, they start looking at the grammar and they start trying to memorize lots and lots of vocabulary. But remember, your brain and its way of functioning in a foreign language is like a sponge. So it builds connections like all of the connections in a sponge, and if you add vocabulary to something that doesn't have structure, all that water is going to fall out of the sponge. And so what you want to do is you want to have some structure first. In order to get that structure in a foreign language, what you need to do is you need to start speaking in full sentences. Now, when you start speaking in full sentences, you might be using some past tense and all kinds of weird grammar here and there, and you don't know what's going on yet with the grammar. But those things are actually really easy to explain once you've already practiced and said quite a few sentences, especially when your sentences are falling into similar patterns. You're not going too beyond what you need to do. So remember, N+1. Push yourself a little bit more than what you already know. So 80% of every sentence that you learn is something that you can understand. And then you will pick up patterns very quickly. So by learning how to train yourself or actually training from the beginning on how to speak, listen and repeat with all of these sentences as you go on, you'll be able to pick up those patterns naturally. And then after 3 or 4 months of this kind of practice, you take a look at the grammar and you take a look at the vocabulary and how to expand your vocabulary. First, you have that structure, that sponge-like structure. You can add vocabulary. You have an environment in which to use it. You can now create a lot of your own sentences. And then you look at the grammar. For example, you'll notice how you'll use an L ending in most Slavic languages for the past tense. In the South Slavic languages, that L will become like an O sound. It's kind of like the Portuguese L pronounced like a U. And so you can make these kind of really easy, quick mind maps for yourself on remembering how the grammar works in each language, or whatever language you're learning. And so as time goes on, you're able to refine and really dedicate your effort on trying to make all of your sentences and your grammar sound better. And all of the sentences that you've been training through your speaking and listening make much more sense now. So when you start to memorize a lot of things from the very beginning, you'll end up wasting a lot of time, and a lot of stuff you'll just forget because you haven't really built up any experiences using the language and speaking the language. Once you've built up that experience, then you look at what's happening grammar-wise and vocabulary-wise, and things make a lot more sense. I can give you some extra tips on how somebody with a lot of experience learning foreign languages would do it. When I first start learning a foreign language, besides knowing the sound system, I like to know what language family does the language belong to. Is it going to have any vocabulary that I'm completely unfamiliar with? For example, if you're learning a language like Georgian or Kartvelian from the Caucasian area, Georgian is kind of like a language isolate. It has its own language family, but really it's not related to any other language. And so it has some borrowings from Romance languages. It has some borrowings from the Middle Eastern languages like Arabic. So you have like sat for time, and you'll have popular maybe from Russian. You'll have some words in there that are borrowings. Now besides those borrowings, you need to focus on what's happening in Georgian specifically. And so Georgian has a very complex verbal structure, and it has a very complex noun and verbal agreement system. And so what you want to do is you want to be able to think of it in terms of how vocabulary is structured. So Georgian makes use of prefixes. So when I learn a new verb, then I can add different prefixes like mo or ga or gamo, and I can create new meanings to these verbs. And when I see a verb in a sentence, or I hear a verb in a sentence, I'm able to identify it. So the tool or the mindset that advanced language learners use is the basic idea of just recognizing words. So for example, if I hear the word namdivlad in Georgian, I know that it's an adverb because the word ends with an AD. If the word ends in an O, when I'm learning Russian, I would make also the similar reaction is maybe this word, like if I say medlенно, o, then I know that this word is probably an adverb in Russian. So being able to recognize what are nouns and verbs and adverbs, and are adjectives, do adjectives act like verbs, or do adjectives act more like nouns? Things like this. When I'm able to identify all the parts of speech in a sentence, it makes learning that language so much more enjoyable, but also much quicker. So when I'm learning a new foreign language, I'm definitely not going to understand all the words. But what I am going to do is try to find bilingual text or parallel text. So for example, I have the translation in English, and I'm learning the sentence in the foreign language, and I can kind of mix and match where the words match up. So for example, what do you need today? And then I can match up the word brauchen with the word for need, and I can I can actually identify that the verb in the sentence has an en ending in German, and I can match those words up like that. So in that way, I'm actually able to identify all of the words in the sentence and try to match up with the word order. So the word order is going to differ quite a bit. I'm going to explain in another video how we can tell whether a language is difficult or not. And so that'll be an interesting video. And the difficulty of the language will actually define how long it takes us to learn that language. So getting back to your overall strategy for picking up a new language, you want to start with the alphabet first, and specifically the sound system. And then you can learn the alphabet on top of that sound system a little bit later, especially if it's a different alphabet. And the second thing is you want to start training all of your sentences bilingually in the beginning, so you're able to mix and match the words and identify them. And then you start refining your skills with grammar and adding more vocabulary. And usually if you're dedicating perhaps 30 minutes to an hour every single day, you should be able to build up to a good conversational level within 6 months.